Well, hello, everybody. It's been a little while. It's good to be back. I'm going to say the same thing I say every time I take a few weeks off and then come back. I really hope to do this regularly. That's a dream, but I'm really glad to be here. Today, I have a topic that's really important and I think is going to be really eye opening for you, and it's going to really help in basically anything you want to accomplish in life. First off, now you probably first saw me on TikTok, but you may follow me on Instagram or YouTube, or you might be signed up for the newsletter, which I'm going to try to have a link in the show notes for the newsletter sign up. I realize that a lot of people don't know about that, and I've been doing it for a long time, and a lot of people haven't been able to enjoy it. So hop on that. It's not a lot of spam. It's a lot of educational, inspirational content, just like you'd get here on the podcast, just in written form. Because believe it or not, it's actually easier for me to express myself in writing a lot of the times, even more so than talking. You know how much I love talking. So, no matter where you came from, I really want you to get into the Facebook group, Lose Weight with John. There's a link for that as well in the show notes, because I've put so much cool stuff in there that's free. It's in the guide section of the group. We have an emotional eating webinar, a workshop, whatever you want to call it. I've got numerous older podcast episodes up that I think are really good. So yeah, be sure to go over there, Lose Weight with John, sign up there. And if you give me your email as you sign up for the group, that will also get you signed up into the newsletter. So you could two birds, one stone, right? The Weight Loss Freedom Academy is rocking and rolling. We're about 6 months in. I've taught most of the course for that by now, and now we're moving into the very last phases of the coursework, and it's really exciting to see the people who have kept up with the coursework, seeing the way it's affected their lives and the changes they're seeing. Yeah, it's just a really great group, and this is slowly but surely kind of taking over for my one-to-one coaching, because the group setting is really powerful in a lot of ways. One-to-one is good, but the group setting has probably more advantages. And plus, when we need it, we can always jump on a call and do our one-to-one or whatever. So yeah, if you're looking to make a big change, if you're ready to let go of emotional eating and reconnect with your innate motivation, and you want me to guide you through that process, then hit me up, email me, talk to me about coaching. Can't hurt. Worst case scenario, I get to know you, which is always nice. Let's see, I've got a book in the works. The book centers around what I call the only diet. That's the title of the book, I think, because if you're in the Weight Loss Freedom Academy, then you know the very first module I take you through basically explains why there is only one diet for weight loss. And that sounds like I might be suggesting a cookie cutter solution. Nothing could be further from the truth. When you understand the only diet for weight loss, it's based around two principles. I'm not going to get into it today. Or heck, maybe I should just get into it. Yeah, fine, F it. So, I won't bury the lead. I'm writing a book based on this concept, but I'm going to go ahead and throw a couple of the concepts your way right now. There is only one diet for weight loss, and that is get yourself into a calorie deficit and then manage the stress that deficit causes. Because every calorie deficit causes stress. And this is something we don't talk about enough. It's one of the many topics that we should talk more about and less about carbs and a bunch of other crap, when stress management is the number one task for somebody who wants to lose weight in the long run. That's why the only diet, I also call it the stress management diet. So, what kind of stresses happen when we go into a calorie deficit? Well, let's go back in time in the Wayback Machine to when we are running around in bands of 120 people on the plains of Central Asia or Africa, wherever. The biggest things that were a threat to your life were a lack of clean water, a lack of food, and a lack of proper shelter. Our relationship to survival really centered around lack. This is why so many of our mentalities today center around lack, that keep us stuck and keep us in these impoverished mindsets. So if you're suddenly without one of the things that your body needs more than anything to survive, your brain is going to start to freak out about that. It's going to say, this becomes number one priority. And if you think about things that are stressing you out, it's not because they're not a priority. It's because your brain is screaming at you saying this needs to get taken care of, or someone else is screaming at you saying this needs to get taken care of. And when you go into a calorie deficit, and remember, for a calorie deficit to be significant in any way toward weight loss, it has to be sustained over time. So it's not like this happens if you go one day into a calorie deficit. This obviously starts to accrue after a few days, and then more and more as days become weeks and weeks become months. The stresses are psychological, the stresses are physiological. If you diet too hard, if you get in too deep of a calorie deficit, you're going to start to mess with your hormones, your sleep's going to go to crap, hunger regulation is going to get real wonky. There are sensory adaptations as well, where suddenly food will start smelling better and will start tasting better. Now, you can use this to your advantage because now your quote unquote diet food, which is usually whole food based, hopefully. And if you've struggled to eat that way in the past, one of the ways to really learn to love whole foods is to be in a calorie deficit because you're going to like them more when you're in a calorie deficit. Why? Because your brain is trying to get you to eat more. So it's making what you eat more pleasurable to your senses. So if you have some diet management techniques to remain consistent in a moderate calorie deficit, then actually you'll start to enjoy the food you are eating more, and that can make it more sustainable. However, it also, for some people, makes it very hard to say no to uh, seconds or an extra portion or something that they've been craving. If you're in a calorie deficit, you're going to lose weight. There's really not many ways around that. People are obsessed with genes and hormones. It's like, listen, okay, think of somebody in your life who they've got terrible genes and they've got terrible hormones, and they're sure that's why they can't lose weight. And then we get them to sign up for an experiment. And we get them to sign paperwork that allows us to pretty much do anything. And they didn't read the paperwork, which works out because what we're going to do is we're going to throw them in a prison cell. And you and I are going to control what they eat day in and day out. And they simply do not have the ability anymore to eat more calories than what we're prescribing for them. Does that person not lose any weight? I think if anybody wants to try this, I've got a jail cell. It's technically an Airbnb. You rent the Airbnb, I lock you in a cell, and then, yeah, it's weight loss camp. No, that would be actually, that probably could get people to sign up for that. But it would work, is what I'm saying, is that if you were truly throttling down your calories into a caloric deficit, anybody in this space, you've heard people come to you and say, oh, I was in a calorie deficit for 17 weeks and I didn't lose a single pound. Any weight loss coach has heard that one. And it's like, well, then you weren't in a calorie deficit. You'll know you're in a calorie deficit when you're losing weight. If you're not losing weight, you're not in a deficit. For 99% of the time, it's that simple. Now, here's when things do get a little more complicated. When stress levels get really high. So when stress levels get really high, because you're in too deep of a deficit or you've been in even a moderate deficit for too long, all of a sudden things like your sleep can start to go out of whack. And if your sleep goes out of whack, you're not going to be recovering from your exercise as well. There might be inflammation, bloating, water retention. Also, there are psychological ways that I see people's brains mess with them all the time. One thing that I see is, have you ever experienced where you're like, let's say you're 360 pounds and you're trying to get down to 350, and you work really hard to get down to 351, 351.2, 350.4, and you're like, okay, tomorrow's going to be the day. And then it's 350.6. And then you're like, okay, come on, I'm going to really dial it in. And then you really do everything perfect. And it's 351 again. And it's just like days and days of coming so close, 350.2. And then you're like, okay, tomorrow surely is going to be the day. And then, of course, it's not. It's 351.4 all of a sudden when you've been at the sticking point for a whole week. That's really common. I think that these things happen. They can happen at any phase. If the body is unhappy or if something in the psyche is dysregulated. But what can happen is your body can choose to hold on to water. And when it does that, you tend to hold water in the places where you also hold the most fat. So this can really trick you, because if your fat cells are holding a bunch of water, it just feels like fat to the casual observer. So you lose hope, and then you eat. If you've done this in the past, you started workout plan, you start a diet plan, and then you get stuck at some point, you hit a plateau and then you quit. If there's a piece of your psyche that doesn't want you to lose weight, I'm not saying there is, but if there were, you just gave it the exact game plan. And this is why so many people, they hit a plateau real early on and then they quit. They don't even have to wait that long before they hit a plateau. Is there something in everybody's psyche that's sabotaging them? That's a much more complex topic. For some people, absolutely. Other people, not so much. For me, I definitely experienced that. So I know firsthand how real it is. But patience wins the day. If you're consistent over time, these things work themselves out. And it's called the whoosh effect, when for whatever reason you've been holding on to a lot of water and you haven't been losing weight. And then all of a sudden your body goes, okay, fine. And it just will just let it out all at once. And I've seen people lose multiple pounds in a day when that happens. So yeah, people do have a hard time getting into a calorie deficit. There's a lot of mistakes people make. They will take some random number, that arbitrary number that someone gave them, and run with that, and then be baffled when either it's so extreme that they end up quitting, or it's not a significant calorie deficit at all for them, or they go into a calorie deficit but then they start becoming a lot more listless and sedentary, and they're not looking after their exercise and their activity, and all of a sudden they're not burning as many calories, right? There's a lot of ways you can screw up a basic calorie deficit. However, when it comes to comparing the two, getting into a calorie deficit versus staying there, I think staying there presents far more strategic, emotional, psychological challenges. Learning how to get into an effective calorie deficit, that's something that if I sat you down in a room for 20 minutes and you followed a list of things I told you to do, you'd be fine. You know how to do that for the rest of your life. But being compliant in the long term, where we really actually lose the weight, that's where there's just such a greater variety of factors and variables and externalities that can swoop in and complicate the picture. Just when you think you've seen it, all of a sudden there's a new wrinkle and a new challenge to figure out. And these challenges are many. It's everything from, well, I'd say there's temptation comes in about four different types. There's temptation that you know to predict, like you're going to a wedding, there's going to be a cake, you know that cake is a thing for you. Okay. Then there's temptation that you could prevent, right? I don't need to buy ice cream, so I'm not going to put it in my house. And if I did leave it in my house and then I was tempted, okay, that's a different class of temptation. Another very common one that hangs people up, even after they've gotten really good at dealing with the first two, is, oh, Debbie brought cupcakes to the office because it's so and so's birthday. And it's so unexpected that you haven't prepared yourself mentally for it, and catches you on the wrong day, and those cupcakes are just eating at you from the inside out, and eventually you just get worn down and you eat a bunch of cupcakes. I guess that's three. I could probably force a fourth one. I could probably think of one, but maybe the fourth situation is things like travel, where you literally can't predict a lot of what's going to happen. You can't prep all your meals just like you do at work. You can't know exactly what restaurants they're going to have in the airport in Charlotte. And that is a little bit more difficult as well. That's a higher level of remaining consistent, being able to do so on the fly without stressing yourself out too much. Now, every person is going to have their own particular flavor of struggle when it comes to remaining consistent on a calorie deficit or workout plan for a considerable amount of time. I'll talk about that a bit, but before I do that, let's talk about the fact that if you don't end your deficit, your body will. Weight loss is a biological adaptation that our bodies undertake when they're faced with a significant and sustained calorie deficit. Why? Because the amount of calories you burn in a day relates heavily to your mass, no pun intended. Now, we're not talking about the difference between losing fat versus lean tissue yet. We're just talking about weight. You will lose weight in a calorie deficit because your body wants to burn fewer calories so that it can create an equilibrium with its new food supply. And it will try to do this even if you have plentiful fat stores a lot of the time. Why? Because, hey, it's like if you lose your job all of a sudden and you're living off your savings, wouldn't you maybe get rid of some unnecessary expenditures just to make your savings last that much longer? Your brain's thinking the same thing. That's why, even though people have dozens or hundreds of pounds of fat available on their frame, the body will still choose to reduce lean tissue if that person's not careful. I won't get into that in this podcast, but it's an important topic, how to preserve lean mass when you're in a calorie deficit. So if you go into, let's say, a 750 calorie deficit, after 12 weeks, you're not in a 750 calorie deficit. Your body weight has gone down, hopefully, right? It's a significant deficit. The weight loss math nerds would tell you that's about 1.5 pounds a week of fat if you're losing fat. But let's say you're just losing 2 pounds a week and 3/4 of it is fat and a quarter of that is lean mass, which is actually a pretty good ratio. It's normal to lose a little bit of lean mass as you're losing fat. So you lose 2 pounds a week for 12 weeks. Well, now you're 24 pounds lighter. And if you were 240 pounds when you started, now you're 216. Did my math go? Did I do that right? Yeah. Well, you're considerably less heavy. So you're not going to burn as many calories at rest. And you're not going to necessarily burn as many calories while you're exercising, especially if that exercise is done under your body weight. If you're riding an exercise bike, probably not a huge difference in the caloric expenditure. But if you're running, yeah, that's going to be a considerable difference. And it's going to affect the calories you burn while walking as well. Now, oftentimes these can be made up for by improvements in fitness that come because of weight loss. There's a yin and yang to all things. But it's quite possible that after 12 weeks of sustained dieting, caloric restriction, I should say, you're no longer in a 750 calorie deficit. By the end of that 12 weeks, your deficit might only be 450 calories or 350 calories. And that's why that person was steadily losing 2.5 pounds per week at the beginning. By the end, they might only be losing 1.5 pounds a week. And that will continue to dwindle until it's 0 pounds a week. And the body has just acclimatized completely to 750 fewer calories a day on average. The body's kind of amazing like that. And it will ruin your diet. However, it's doing it using the mechanism that gets the weight off in the first place. So you just remember that weight loss is absolutely possible, but you have to end it. You have to have an exit strategy, or your body will end it for you. And that's going to be a punishing experience, especially if you're fighting that and you still want to keep losing weight at the same rate. It's going to be very hard to do that for months and months. So yeah, when you go into a calorie deficit, it's good to have an exit strategy. It's good to have a rough idea of, okay, here's the minimum amount of time I probably want to be in this deficit, and here's probably the maximum amount of time. And then check in with your body, check in with the scale, check in with your coach, check in with me, or if your doctor is overseeing your weight loss, right? And make the smartest decision you possibly can. And then we come out of that deficit, we go to maintenance. And obviously, maintenance at 240 is probably going to be a little bit higher than maintenance at 216. But now we find our maintenance at 216. And just by playing around, watching the scale, we're going to gain 4 or 5 pounds of water weight as we come out of a caloric deficit. So, weight hangs out around 220, 221. You basically haven't gained any fat. And your maintenance calories is 300 or 3,200 calories a day instead of 3,400. And taking that opportunity to take a maintenance break is really helpful, because this is when you're learning how to maintain weight that you've lost long term. And the longer you spend in a maintenance period, the better, because you have put your body through a stressful situation. And depending on the person, this can be super stressful or mildly stressful. And really depends on the person how much time they need to take. But a rule of thumb I've heard from Dr. Mike Israetel from Renaissance Periodization, he talks about doing half to 2/3 of the time that you were in a calorie deficit. So he takes this very seriously, and his recommendations are pretty extreme. So if you were in a 12-week deficit, he would say take a break at maintenance for at least 6 weeks. Interesting. I think a lot of the people he's talking to are strength athletes, physique athletes, bodybuilders, weightlifters. Often I've heard him talk about this in the context of extreme weight issues. And he spoke about it in the same terms. It's just saying like, well, if you're 500 pounds, lose 50 pounds, stop after about 10%, take that time, whatever long it took, take that time, half of that in maintenance, and then go into another calorie deficit. And he's like, listen, yeah, it seems like it's going to take this long time, but really, you're not in a caloric deficit that whole time, which means you're just living life and you're going through periods of losing and then maintaining and then losing and then maintaining. And the alternative, a lot of the time, is to just end up hitting a plateau, grinding yourself to a halt, and then quit. Whereas this way, it's a little bit slower, it takes a bit more patience, but you are more likely to arrive at your goal weight feeling healthy, happy, bright eyed, bushy tailed, and prepared through at least one or two or three, maybe maintenance periods that you did at various like little terraces along the way, the little self imposed plateau that you created through maintenance.
And I've come back after editing just to make sure that I'm clear here that you don't have to do this. This is a very smart man's recommendation, but it's one recommendation. You don't have to do these extremely long maintenance periods if you don't want to. Sometimes, if you're very, very heavy, there is a sense of urgency. And once you're making progress, you don't want to stop. Really, just realize that breaks are a great idea, and keep in mind that, yeah, you just want to be in the driver's seat of your weight loss and not feel like you're just putting so much stress on your body and driving it so hard that eventually the wheels fall off. That's ultimately the goal. And however you do that, that's totally up to you. So yeah, I just wanted to make clear there isn't one set way anybody has to think about this or go about it.
So we know that there's a beginning and an end to a caloric deficit. And the more that we plan the end of the caloric deficit and the more we understand what we want to see before we end the deficit, like, all right, if I'm losing 3 pounds a day at the beginning, I'm a big guy, right? So if I'm losing 3 pounds a day, I might continue going until I'm down to about 1.5 pounds on average a week. And if I start to feel crappy, my sleep starts to go, and I'm on point with my nutrition, meaning I'm getting my recommended daily allowance of my vitamins and minerals. I'm just in a calorie deficit doing so. If I'm ticking all my boxes, if I'm managing my stress, and I've just been in this diet for quite a while and it's grinding to a halt, okay, right? I stuck it out for at least the last 2 weeks. I'm like, is there a whoosh? Is there a whoosh? Is there a whoosh? No, this is just slowly grinding to a halt. Okay. And then I come out of the deficit. I go to maintenance, or what I estimate my maintenance to be, watch the scale. If the scale goes too high, drop the calories a little bit. If I'm still ravenously hungry and the scale is not going up at all, then raise the calories a little bit. So you can just adjust until you find that maintenance. So, whether you choose to take breaks or not, your success is going to revolve around the consistency, the compliance to your caloric deficit. Obviously, there's lots of strategies that we can put into place to do caloric deficits intelligently. But at the end of the day, if you can't stick to your program, you're screwed. You're never going to lose weight. So, the stress management diet is predicated on this idea that we find the easiest possible way to do everything. We don't go saying, all right, what are the good foods and the bad foods? We're not doing that. We're not saying, oh, I got to get rid of all processed foods. Nope. We're not saying you got to get rid of sugar. Absolutely not. In fact, what I want you to do is make the fewest changes as possible. The fewest changes necessary to create a meaningful, significant, but sustainable deficit. And less is more, especially at the beginning, right? We can always deepen the deficit. Start small, keep it easy. I teach people how to do this in depth in the Weight Loss Freedom Academy. That's the first thing we go through. But the key is to look at your diet, to really understand it. And this is a big thing. The stress management diet, the only diet success in general, however you want to think about it, is so improved. Your chances of success are vastly improved if you take stock of your life as you've been living it before you get into the diet. So many people look for a diet and they're like, okay, I want a diet. What's the diet? Give me the meal plan. Tell me what to eat. And I'll eat that and then I'll lose weight. Wrong. You have to take stock of your life. Well, you don't have to. I encourage you to. Most people have never sat down and said, I would like to lose weight. Okay, let me write down 5 days of eating of what I've been eating for the last few months, just so I can see, okay, what's my baseline? What is my maintenance calories? Most people have no idea what their maintenance calories are when all it requires is counting what you eat. Get a calorie tracking app like you're going to do, like you're going to go on a diet, but don't go on a diet. Just track your calories and see what you're eating. And if it's shockingly high, that's good because that means your maintenance calories is high, which means if we knock you into a 1,000 calorie deficit, that's going to be higher than if your maintenance calories were low. If your maintenance calories are 4,000 calories a day and you're horrified by that, realize that it's better than if it was 3,000 because then when we put you in a calorie deficit, you're going to be eating roughly 1,000 more calories given the deficit. Does that make sense? Flip side is you go, I'm not actually eating as many calories as I thought. I thought I was going to be eating 4,000 calories a day, but I eat between 2,700 and 3,200. And honestly, if I'm looking at my weight, it's really been stable for a long time. I gained a lot of weight in that really stressful time, 5 months ago. But since then, I've really been staying at whatever, 350 or 420. And that's another thing. Side note, many asterisk side notes on this one. If you've maintained your weight, I don't care if it's 599 pounds. I don't care if it's 1,000 pounds. If you've maintained your weight, that is a victory because you are not gaining. And if you have significant weight to lose, that means you are somebody who's prone to gaining significant amounts of weight. Therefore, if you can maintain your weight, that is a massive improvement in the right direction. And yeah, that's why I find a lot of clients. They're not actively gaining so much as they're quite often maintaining. And so you take a food log. You start to look at your life objectively and start to take in all this glorious, beautiful, amazing data that's right there for you to pick up. And once you have all these data points, you have a detailed view of, okay, this is this person's life. What do they eat? How do they move? Okay. You can look at their food log and you can go, okay, they eat this thing but a lot of people would say that you can't have that on a diet. For instance, like sugary soda. They drink 2 sugary sodas a day, but they also eat peanut butter every day. And if you take the calories of the sugary sodas and compare it to the amount of peanut butter they're eating in a day, the peanut butter is actually more. So, what if we could substitute or eliminate the peanut butter? And maybe ask yourself, well, I'm eating more calories of peanut butter. Well, if I had to give up one, which one would I choose? The sodas or the peanut butter? And you might be surprised by the answer. You might go, oh, I could totally drink diet soda. That's fine. And then you knock out 200 or 300 calories a day, right? Just like that. Or you're like, I love my sodas. I'd rather remove something else. Maybe I'll remove them in the future. But for right now, John said to do the absolute easiest thing I could. And for me right now, that's leaving my sodas in my diet. So you know what? This peanut butter is so calorically dense. If I get rid of that or if I substitute it, or if I just heavily moderate it, I can put myself into a calorie deficit, boom, just like that, 200 calories a day on average, just by removing peanut butter or mitigating it. And then I'm going to find a couple other things that are easy to replace. I have a bag of chips with my sandwich at lunch. I'm just going to start taking an apple instead. I kind of like apples. So, like, yeah, it's not chips, but I mean, it's worth it. I can do that. And so you shaved off, 50, 70 calories there. And sure enough, you do this in 3 or 4 places, and all of a sudden you've created a moderate but effective calorie deficit, 150 calories somewhere in there when you're just starting. And if you're a smaller person, starting closer to 250 is smart. And if you're a bigger person, 750 calories shouldn't be that big of a problem. But it really also depends on your hunger signals, not necessarily your size, right? We're talking about size because we're talking about probably what your metabolism is relative to that. But people's metabolisms can vary wildly, even though they can be, yeah, a bigger person can have a slower metabolism than a smaller person. How you get into your deficit is often the key to a lot of the stress management. Because instead of going and picking out any old diet, make a diet, tailor it to you. It's not that hard. Look at your life, write down the things that you put in your face. Don't change anything, right? And for a lot of people, this brings up a lot of shame to have to write down the things that they're eating. However, a lot of times, simply writing it down and seeing it on paper kind of takes the power away from a lot of it. And they go, I mean, a lot of stuff that I just don't really need or even want. Oftentimes, just writing it down, externalizing it helps you see, oh, wow, I eat certain things that I'm just mindlessly doing it. I don't really care about it. I had a client who, maybe I did a podcast with her. I think I did. But she started counting her calories. And the first day she ate, she was like, "What? That's nuts!" And it wasn't like a big shame spiral or anything. She's just like, "That's way more than I need. Even I can be in a healthy calorie surplus and be way under 5,000." And so, without even really trying, she really averaged 3,500 calories from there, which was a surplus, but far less. A lot of times, you might be amazed by what your brain will do for you just by giving it data, just by bringing a little more awareness to your behaviors. Another good thing about the only diet is that it makes things very simple. I need to be in a calorie deficit. I need to honor the fact that consistency is way more important than any other factor. I don't need to worry about carbs or even protein or fats necessarily. If I want to lose weight, that stuff doesn't matter. I can lose weight simply by being in a caloric deficit and keeping it there. Now, over time, how you use your macros will help you with that because certain macro distributions are going to be more sustainable than others. Protein is highly satiating, right? Fat is more satiating than carbs for some people, but the right amount of carbs is what some people need to feel balanced and energized and to sleep well. But your meal timing, composition, superfoods, eating this food or that food, or drinking this and that, none of that matters. It doesn't matter at all. If it does, it's a secondary or tertiary consideration to the primary driver of weight loss, which is calorie deficit. And so that's what makes the only diet actually not a cookie cutter diet because it's so focused on the only two principles that really matter: calorie deficit and sustaining that, managing the stress that it creates over time. What it does is it allows you to do it. You want to do keto? Great. You want to be vegan? Great. You want to eat only animal products? Great. It works for any religion. It works for any food system, any culture. I've coached clients through Ramadan, right? Clients who can't eat certain, who don't eat pork, and other clients who don't eat meat at all or don't eat any sort of animal product. That's never been an impediment in my coaching because my view of weight loss is grounded in the reality that calorie deficit is king. And even more important than calorie deficit, I think, is sustainability and stress management. Now, we have to say, if we're going to talk about stress management, the total stress in your life is going to come from more than just your calorie deficit. And so, to lose weight effectively over time, you often need to take a look at your life and notice where the biggest stressors are. Because if you can resolve those, if you can create new boundaries that create less stress for you or open up more of your personal freedom, take a lot off your plate. If you can make that job change that you've been thinking about doing but just kind of haven't had the oomph to do, if you can renegotiate that relationship in your life, maybe it's a family member who's just kind of wearing on you, and you can redraw those boundaries. I've seen it happen in so many different ways. That stress that you lessen now creates more bandwidth for you to introduce stress via diet and exercise. And obviously, exercise, whereas it creates stress, a hermetic stress, a healthy stress, it's only going to, you'd have to really overdo it to stress your body. But you'd be surprised how many people do that, even people who aren't in shape. You start moving your body and it gets to be really addictive, and you start doing things you didn't think you could do, and you start snapping out of your rut. And usually the thing I have to tell people to do is pump your brakes. It's the hardest thing when you've just started getting back into a certain activity, especially something you love. Like me, I'm a big guy, but I actually like running. And if I get back into it, I'll often start going way too hard because you realize, I miss this. I miss pushing myself. I miss getting better each week. And then, of course, a lot of times we have this arbitrary standard in our head of, oh, I was this good before, so I have to be there in order to feel good about myself. And that's silly. And that maybe gets us into the topic that I was going to talk about today, which is goals and how they are completely screwing you and your progress in almost every aspect of your life. And goal culture is baked into prioritizing goals and goal setting and goal achievement is baked into just every nook and cranny of our culture. So it probably sounds strange for me to say that your goals are a big factor in what's screwing you up. But next time I will probably cover that. And that's a good addendum. A lot of what you can do to create more peace in your life in general, and especially when it comes to your health and fitness goals, is to learn to look at goals differently and avoid this sort of five main pitfalls that I've identified with them. So for this week, I'll end it there. It's a very broad topic. Like I said, I'm writing a whole book on it. I don't think it's going to be a tome. I think it's going to be pretty lean and mean, but I'll be able to cover most of the topics that people might have questions about. And the good thing is, I remember to tell myself sometimes, like, hey, John, not every book has to include everything because you get to write more than one book. And maybe for some people that would be a death sentence, but for me, it's a benediction. It's like, ah, that's a relief. I don't have to cram everything into this one book. Yeah, it feels really good to be writing again. I'm excited to share these ideas with people because, I mean, I had to learn this stuff because I couldn't find the perspectives I needed. That's ultimately where it all came from. If you are in a calorie deficit and you're not losing weight, look to your stress management, look to your sleep, see if you can create more peace in your life so that you can prioritize your fitness and your health. Because honestly, whatever stuff is stressing you out, it's not more important than your health. It really isn't. If you feel like it is, you're just falling into a delusion that it is, falling into old stories that you're not allowed to take care of yourself. You're not allowed to put yourself first, that something catastrophic is going to happen if you do that. If you're someone who's just starting off, or if you've done this many times and failed, do two things. Think about your life as it is now. Think about the average day in your life, the things you eat, the things you do. Write it all down. Just take a snapshot of this life. And hey, if it's a robust life, shall we say, if it's a very caloric life full of many decadencies and pleasures and emotional eating, write that all down, because what may seem like obstacles to you right now, to a coach like me, I see those as areas for opportunity because I know how you can get through every single one of those. And that means that however unhealthy your life feels right now, there's really no place for shame in that. Obviously, I understand shame is fairly a common reaction, which, hey, book number 2, it's going to be about shame probably. But really, what you're giving yourself is invaluable data, and you're doing something that very few people ever do. You want to be someone who doesn't fail? Do the things that people never do before they start. One being take an inventory of your life and the things you do and the things you eat. And once, if you can write it all down in an objective manner, you can assess it in an objective manner and say, of course. And if there's feelings of judgment that come in and try to make you feel bad for what you're eating, say, of course I'm eating these things, right? Because it's either because it's habits that you've never broken, there's conditioning that you've never found or dismantled, there's trauma that never got healed, there's mental illness that isn't being properly treated. And you can go, of course I'm eating 4,000 calories a day. Of course I'm eating 7,000 calories a day. And that doesn't mean that we're going to stay there. Acceptance does not create the situation. Acceptance merely puts our feet on the ground in the situation as it is. And that puts us closest to the levers that are going to create change in our lives. So acceptance, it feels like wanting a thing or justifying it. No, it's just accepting the truth of what is. And when you do that, you will be in an advantageous position going forward. And from there, you can take a look at your life and start drawing some easy lines through certain foods and starting to go, hey, I can get 200 more steps if I just park further away from the door. You know, silly stuff like that. You hear those tips all the time, right? Just take the stairs instead of the elevator, that kind of stuff, right? Go take a long route, the scenic route around the grocery store. And you'll find all these clever, sneaky ways that you can just get in a few more steps every day. And you'll find clever, sneaky ways that you can get rid of calories and not even really feel it, certainly not suffer because of it. And that's how you really want to enter a calorie deficit, with very little disturbance to your life, because that's going to be the least stress. And it's going to leave the most leeway for if you want to turn the volume up on your calorie deficit. If you're like, hey, I'm losing a pound a week, but I mean, based on my size, I could lose safely 3 pounds a week. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to slowly ratchet up my calorie deficit until I'm losing about 3 pounds a week. And now I have more runway to do so because the 500 calories I took out to start my diet were things that really didn't affect my life that much. It didn't take a lot of willpower and didn't create a lot of stress removing those things. So we have more runway. We have more wiggle room. Compliance is the key after that. And one of the ways we screw up compliance is with how we set our goals. So I think I will talk about that next time. I think I've talked about this enough. I hope I've given a well-rounded discussion. Obviously, I don't want to go down every single rabbit trail and explain the whole spider web of how everything interacts with everything, which is what's very tempting to do. If this interests you, if you like this idea and you want to get into a calorie deficit and you want me to help you do it, if you want me to walk beside you in that, yeah, something I really like to do. If you're somebody who realizes that if I could stop emotionally eating and if I could regain some motivation, I could lose weight. If that's where you are, then please reach out about coaching because that's what I'm absolute best at. This is what we have that constantly you're seeing success with. Some people, they lose weight faster than others. And I can only control so much of that, right? I can only give the recommendations. I can't decide what people are putting in their mouths. What I do see regularly is people letting go of compulsive behaviors and reconnecting with their innate drives, their innate motivation, not having to get on YouTube and get pumped up by somebody else's motivation, but really connecting with their own authentic passions and desire to move. So if you've thought about doing coaching or if you're thinking about it now, shoot me an email, john@oaksweightloss.com. That's Oaks with an E, Oakes.
Another quick addendum: I'm having problems with my email. It's not working right now. So maybe tag also this email address just to make sure I get it: johnoakscoaching@gmail.com.
And I'll ask you some questions, get to know you, and tell you if I think that my program is a good fit for you or not. Yeah, so I'm going to keep working on this book. It's plunking right along. Is that a word? I'm going to keep making podcasts, and I'm going to slowly start to see how far my content wants to spread. And I'm going to just try to be, like I'm saying, when it comes to my content strategy, consistency over intensity, and try not to create expectations for myself that aren't really sustainable, and really just do what's easy, keep it easy. And this is an example of how if you can learn to lose weight the easy way, you can learn to run your life or your business the easy way. And I teach about these things in some ways because I struggle with them more than most people. And so that's why I'm obsessed with these ideas. That's why I've had to learn so much about them, is because I needed to learn every single facet of this to give myself every toehold I could get to enact these changes in my life. And still the process goes on, which is in a way exciting because it means there's limitless growth. Anyways, I hope you're well. If you're not in the Facebook group, I'd love to see you over there. If you are in the Facebook group, let's get some conversations going. Post about how you're doing. Post about, this is your group, this is your space. If you've got struggles, you can talk about it. If you're not sure what to do, you have questions, you want to get into the group and kick around ideas for ways to make life easier for one another. It's so cool when people do that. And I always learn from that too. It's like, oh, that's genius. I never thought of that. So use that group, pool your resources, because for you, me, and everyone else, we're only going to get better and more resilient and more capable when we do that. So, all right, that's all for me this time, but I'll be talking to you again very soon about goals. If you have any questions, you can hit me at john@oaksweightloss.com. Take care, everybody.